The evening felt heavier than usual, and Ava could not explain why. The rain had started just before sunset, soft at first, then steady, turning the sky a deep gray. The house stood quiet around her, almost too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Nathan had left 12 days ago for another work trip, and though he called every night, his voice always sounded far away, like it was traveling from another world. Ava stood by the kitchen sink, watching the water stream down the window. She remembered when rainy nights used to mean something different. They used to cook together, laugh when they burned the garlic bread, sit close on the couch and argue over what movie to watch. Now the couch felt too big for one person. She dried her hands slowly and walked into the living room. A lamp in the corner gave off a soft yellow light. The rest of the house stayed dim. She liked it that way. Bright lights made the emptiness clearer. She picked up her phone and checked for messages. Nothing new. Nathan had texted 3 hours ago. Long meeting. Talk later. Miss you. She had replied with a heart emoji. It felt easier than typing what she really wanted to say. She wanted to tell him she felt like they were drifting. She wanted to ask him if he still felt that spark when he looked at her. But every time she tried to start that conversation, the words disappeared. Ava moved to the hallway mirror and studied her reflection. She was only 34, but lately she looked tired. Not old, just worn. Like someone who had been waiting too long for something to change. She touched her hair, adjusting it for no reason. Who was she fixing herself for? The question made her laugh quietly, but the sound faded fast. Thunder rolled in the distance. The lights flickered once, then stayed steady. Ava walked to the bookshelf and ran her fingers along the framed photo of her wedding day. She and Nathan stood under a bright blue sky, smiling like they had just won something precious. She could still remember how tightly he had held her hand. Back then, he used to look at her like she was the only person in the room. Now they barely looked up from their phones at dinner. She set the photo back and wrapped her arms around herself. The loneliness did not come from being alone in the house. It came from feeling alone in her marriage. That truth scared her more than the storm outside at 9:12 p.m. A sudden knock echoed through the house. Ava's body stiffened. No one ever came by without calling first. She glanced at the clock to make sure she had heard it right. Another knock. Followed firmer this time. Her heart began to race. She walked slowly toward the front door, her steps careful against the wooden floor. The porch light was on, casting a pale glow through the glass panel. She stood on her toes and looked through the small window. Ethan, her neighbor from across the street. He looked different in the rain. His dark jacket was soaked and his hair clung to his forehead. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing toward the road as if hoping no one else would see him standing there. Ava hesitated for only a second before unlocking the door. When she opened it, a rush of cool air filled the hallway. "I'm really sorry to bother you," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "My car won't start and my phone just died. Could I use yours for a quick call?" Up close, she noticed faint lines near his eyes. He looked tired, not just from the rain, but from something deeper. She had spoken to him a few times before. Quick conversations while getting the mail. Friendly waves. He had moved in last year. After selling his house across town, people said he had gone through a rough divorce. Of course, Ava replied without thinking. "Come in before you freeze." He stepped inside carefully, as if afraid of leaving water on the floor. She closed the door behind him, and the storm's noise softened. "Thank you," he said, wiping his hands on his jacket. "I didn't know who else to ask." His words were simple, but they landed somewhere unexpected in her chest. She handed him her phone and watched as he dialed a number from memory. His voice changed when he spoke to the towing service, short, practical, polite. He explained the problem quickly and ended the call in less than 2 minutes. "They'll be here in about 30, she said, handing the phone back. "Sorry again." "It's fine," she answered. "You can wait here if you want." Pouring. He hesitated, glancing toward the door. Are you sure? Gosh. She nodded. They moved into the kitchen. Ava turned on the kettle without asking if he wanted tea. It felt natural, like something she would have done years ago for a friend. Ethan sat at the table, his posture straight but relaxed. Water droplets slid from his jacket onto the tile floor. You picked the worst night for car trouble, she said, trying to keep the tone light. He smiled faintly. Story of my life lately. The kettle began to whistle. Ava poured hot water into 2 mugs. Her hands trembled slightly. And she told herself it was just from the cold air that had rushed in earlier. She set 1 cup in front of him. Their fingers brushed for a brief second. The contact was accidental still. She felt it. They both pretended not to notice. Outside, lightning flashed, lighting up the kitchen for a split second. In that bright flash, Ava saw something in his expression: loneliness. Maybe she was only seeing her own feelings reflected back at her. So, how have you been? Ethan asked. The question sounded ordinary. But the way he looked at her made it feel different. Like he truly wanted to know. I've been fine, she answered automatically. He waited. She realized he was expecting more. Just quiet. She added. He nodded slowly. Quiet can be loud sometimes. The sentence surprised her. It felt too honest for small talk. She leaned back in her chair. Yeah, it can. A pause settled between them. Not awkward, just aware. The rain hit the windows harder now. The world outside seemed far away, blurred by water and darkness. Inside the kitchen, the air felt warm. Ava noticed how strange this moment was. A neighbor sitting at her table, her husband miles away. The storm wrapping around the house like a secret. She told herself again that this was nothing. Just kindness. Just 2 adults waiting out bad weather. But deep inside, something had shifted. She studied Ethan more carefully. He had always seemed calm, reserved. Tonight, there was something softer about him. Maybe the rain had washed away the careful distance he usually kept. Thanks again, he said quietly. Most people wouldn't open their door this late. Guess I'm not most people, she replied before thinking. He gave a small smile. That's a good thing. Her heart skipped once, then steadied. She should have changed the subject. Asked about his job, the neighborhood. Anything safe. Instead. She asked, do you ever get used to living alone? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He looked down at his cup. You don't get used to it. You just learn how to fill the silence. His words hung in the air. Ava felt them settle deep inside her. Because she wasn't living alone. And yet she understood exactly what he meant. Another crack of thunder shook the house. The lights flickered again. For a second, the room went dim. Then bright. Time seemed to move differently in that kitchen. Faster and slower at once. Ava became aware of her own breathing, aware of how close they were sitting, aware of how easy it felt to talk to him. That realization scared her more than anything else. She stood abruptly and walked to the sink, pretending to rinse something that was already clean. She needed movement. Space. Behind her, Ethan's voice softened. You don't have to entertain me. I'll be out of your hair soon. She turned back. You're not bothering me. And she meant it. That was the most dangerous part, because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she did not feel invisible. She felt noticed. The thought made her pulse quicken. She glanced at her phone on the counter. No new messages. No calls from Nathan. She imagined telling him about this moment. It would sound harmless. It was harmless. So why did it feel like standing at the edge of something uncertain? Headlights suddenly flashed through the front window. The tow truck. Reality rushed back like cold water. Ethan stood up, pulling on his damp jacket. That's my ride. Ava walked him to the door. The hallway felt narrower now, the air heavier. He paused before stepping outside. Thank you, he said again, but this time his voice carried something deeper. Gratitude, yes. but also connection. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. For a split second, they simply looked at each other. Not smiling, not speaking, just understanding that something unspoken had passed between them. Then he stepped out into the rain. The door closed. Dodd and Ava stood there, her hands still resting on the handle. Realizing that the night had changed more than she expected, the storm continued outside, but inside her heart, a different kind of storm had just begun. The night seemed quieter after Ethan left, but inside Ava, the echoes of their conversation lingered, pressing against her thoughts. She tried to return to the kitchen to rinse the cup he had used, but her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the cold from the rain or even the thunder that shook through the house. It was something else, a warmth she hadn't felt in months, a feeling that both excited and terrified her. She put the cup down and leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a moment. The sound of the rain was steady, rhythmic, but inside, her heart beat unevenly. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her. Ava wandered back to the living room, curling into the corner of the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders. The empty space beside her reminded her of Nathan's absence, of how long she had been used to sleeping and living without the comfort of conversation. Her phone buzzed with a notification. But it wasn't Nathan, it was a reminder she had set weeks ago about an online meeting she had already ignored. She ignored it again. Her mind kept drifting back to Ethan, to the calm way he had listened, the faint smile he gave, the feeling that someone finally understood her without judgment. It was fleeting, yet heavy with possibility. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her doorbell. Panic shot through her chest. Who could it be now, at this hour? Her fingers shook slightly as she moved toward the door. When she peered through the peephole, she was surprised to see Ethan again, drenched from the rain, looking unsure and hesitant. He was holding a small brown envelope in his hands. His car had long since been towed, she realized. He can't possibly be back for more trouble, she thought. Before she could decide what to do, he knocked again, gently this time. Ava took a deep breath and opened the door. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice uncertain. He shifted his weight, glancing past her to the street as if checking for witnesses. Then he stepped inside. "I didn't want to bother you again," he said, his voice low, "but I thought maybe I could return something I forgot." He handed her the brown envelope. "I left these in your mailbox earlier today. I think they're yours." Ava took the envelope, recognizing the handwriting on the label. "Thank you," she said softly. She wanted to hand it back, tell him to leave, but she felt frozen in place. There was something in the way he looked at her, something tender and patient that made it hard to speak. "Would you like some tea?" she asked almost automatically. The words surprised her more than him. Ethan's eyes flickered with surprise, then relief. "I'd like that," he said simply. It was enough, and she led him back to the kitchen again. The warmth from the kettle and the soft glow of the kitchen light felt intimate without being too close. Ava poured the water into 2 mugs, and they both held their cups as the steam rose between them, blurring the space, making it feel separate from the rest of the house. Silence settled, but it wasn't awkward. It was comforting, the kind of silence that meant someone was listening, truly listening. "Thanks for letting me come back," Ethan said finally. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me here again." "You're fine," Ava said, searching for the right words. "You're not bothering me." He nodded, but didn't press further. They sipped their tea in silence for a few moments. The rain continued its steady rhythm, and the thunder had faded to a low rumble, like the world was exhaling. Ava noticed, for the first time, how different it felt to have someone else's attention without judgment. No expectation, no pressure. Just awareness. Then, almost unconsciously, she began to speak. Not about trivial things like the neighborhood or the storm, but about herself, about Nathan, about how distant she had been feeling, about the quiet that had settled in their house and, eventually, in her heart. She didn't hold back. The words poured out, each one releasing a tension she hadn't realized was there. Her voice shook occasionally, but she kept going. She spoke about the lonely nights, the dinners they shared without conversation, the days she felt invisible. Despite living with someone she loved, Ethan listened without interrupting. His presence was calm and steady, encouraging her to speak without pushing her, without judgment. He shared small details of his life to his divorce, the way he had moved across town to start over, the solitude he had learned to endure. He didn't offer advice, didn't make her feel guilty, and never suggested solutions. He simply heard her. And in hearing her, he gave her a strange sense of validation, of acknowledgement that she had been craving. Hours seemed to pass without noticing. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, the night outside turning quiet and misty. Ava realized she had leaned forward at the table without thinking, elbows resting on the surface, cup warm in her hands, as if bracing herself against something she didn't fully understand. The room felt smaller than before, more personal, charged with an energy that neither of them had named. Ethan finally set his cup down and met her gaze. "You've been carrying a lot," he said softly. There was no judgment, only observation. His words were simple, but they carried weight. "You deserve to be heard." Ava nodded, unsure whether to feel grateful or uneasy. Her chest ached, in a way she hadn't felt in a long time, part longing, part regret, part awakening. This wasn't love, she realized. Not yet. But it was dangerous. She could feel the pull of emotional connection, of shared understanding. That was so familiar, yet forbidden in the context of her marriage. A sudden crash of thunder startled them both. Ava's head jerked toward the window, and Ethan chuckled softly, breaking the tension. She forced a smile. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her heart, a mixture of fear, desire, and curiosity that she didn't quite know how to handle. She decided she needed movement, space to breathe. "I should make sure the back door is locked," she said, almost out of habit. Ethan followed her gaze but didn't comment. He simply watched as she walked to the sliding glass door, the rain dripping from her hair onto the mat. When she turned back, she saw something in him, a softness she hadn't noticed before, a patient kindness. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to reach out, to say something more, to bridge the gap between the loneliness and the warmth of this moment. But she stopped herself. She knew better. This was not a path she could take. "You should probably head home," she said quietly, almost to herself. Ethan nodded, as if he had been waiting for this cue. He stood, the chair scraping softly against the tile. "You've been honest with me," he said. "That takes courage." Ava felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Courage. The word felt heavy with implication. He didn't look at her in a way that demanded anything. He didn't smile in a tempting way. He simply acknowledged what had been shared. And that was enough to make her heart beat faster as he put on his jacket and prepared to leave the room. Seemed to hold its breath. Ava followed him to the door, her hands hovering near the handle. He paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked at her. "Thank you," he said, again, softly, not just for letting him in, but for sharing part of herself. She nodded, barely able to meet his gaze fully. The storm outside had faded to a gentle drizzle, but the storm inside her heart was far from over. Ethan stepped out, shutting the door behind him. The sound of rain outside mingled with the soft click of the lock. Ava leaned against the door, her forehead resting against the cool wood. Her heart raced, but it wasn't from fear. It was from awareness that she had opened a door emotionally. Not physically, that she hadn't realized had been closed for so long. She had shared truths she hadn't told Nathan in months. She had allowed herself to feel seen. And in that, she had felt a dangerous thrill. But danger had a way of showing itself quietly. Like the storm outside that begins as a drizzle and turns into a torrent before anyone notices. Ava understood that the pull she felt toward Ethan was not about him. Not really. It was about the emptiness she had allowed to grow in her marriage. It was about the silence that had been filling her life with longing, about the human need to be understood and acknowledged. She moved to the kitchen again, rinsing the empty cups. The water ran hot and soothing over her hands. She tried to calm herself. She told herself that Ethan's visit had been brief, innocent, necessary even. But her mind kept replaying his eyes, the calm patience in his voice, the way he had listened without interruption or judgment. The clock ticked on. Nathan was miles away, probably asleep in a hotel room somewhere, unaware of the stirrings within his wife's heart. Ava knew she could reach for her phone and text Ethan, continue the conversation, invite him back. That was the dangerous part, the part she had to resist. Instead, she chose silence. She chose reflection. She chose awareness. She thought about the future, about how easy it would be to allow longing to turn into something that would later bring regret. She thought about Nathan, about their marriage, and how fragile it had become, not because of one person, not because of temptation, but because they had stopped speaking, stopped listening, stopped truly being present. By the time Ava finally climbed into bed, the storm outside had passed. The world was quiet again. But inside, her mind replayed every moment of Ethan's visit. She realized that the night had changed her in ways she hadn't expected. She had been reminded of her own needs, her own desires, and the power of connection, even fleeting and accidental. Morning light crept through the curtains, soft and pale, cutting across Ava's bedroom in thin lines. She lay in bed longer than she should have, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. The night's events, the storm, Ethan's visit, their conversation were heavy in her mind. Her chest ached, not from fear or regret, but from the strange clarity that comes after an emotional storm. She realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, she had been fully aware of her own loneliness, her longing, and the fragility of her marriage. Nathan had been gone for nearly 2 weeks, and she understood now that absence had made her emotions sharper, more vivid, more urgent. Ava sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Her bedroom felt different this morning, not because of the sunlight, but because of the awareness it brought. She had spent the previous night alone with her thoughts, with someone who had listened without judgment, and it had awakened feelings she hadn't expected. Ethan had been kind, attentive, patient, but she reminded herself firmly, he was not her future. Nathan was, and it was Nathan she needed to face. She got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, her bare feet brushing the cold wooden floor. The cups from last night were still on the counter, a reminder of the quiet intimacy she had shared with Ethan. She rinsed them mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. She remembered the way he had listened, the calm in his voice, the way he had looked at her without expectation. It had felt electric in its simplicity. But Ava knew she couldn't let it linger in her mind. That kind of attention belonged with someone who could reciprocate fully, someone who shared her life, someone she loved. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Nathan. Flight delayed. We'll be home tonight instead of afternoon. Miss you. Ava's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected to feel this way, a mixture of relief, anticipation, and guilt. Relief because she would finally see him. Anticipation because she had been craving a real conversation with him. Guilt because she had allowed herself to feel understood and noticed by someone else. She decided she couldn't waste time with hesitation. She showered, dressed, and sat by the window while waiting for Nathan's call. The rain had stopped, leaving a faint mist that blurred the streets outside. Birds were beginning to stir, hesitant in the soft morning light. The world seemed quiet, holding its breath, as if sensing the significance of what was about to happen in her life. Finally, her phone rang. She answered immediately. "Hey," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hey, Nathan," replied. His voice was warm but tired. "Flight got delayed. I'll be home tonight." "I know," Ava whispered. There was a pause. the kind that carried more weight than words. She realized in that moment how long it had been since they had shared a conversation like this, a conversation that was real, honest, and without pretense. "We need to talk," she said finally. The words felt heavy but necessary. "About us." Nathan inhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said, "we do." She hung up and sat back, letting the words settle. She knew the conversation would not be easy, would require honesty, courage, and vulnerability, things they had both been avoiding. But after last night, after opening herself up to someone who simply listened, she knew she could not avoid it any longer. The day passed slowly, her mind constantly drifting back to the kitchen table, to the warmth of tea, to the feeling of being heard. She knew she had to separate the memory of that connection from her reality. Ethan had been a mirror, not a temptation. He had reflected back what she had been missing, not in a romantic sense, but in a human sense. What she truly needed was to face the void in her own marriage, to communicate, to rebuild. When evening finally came, the house felt different. She had lit a few candles, soft amber light filling the rooms, casting long shadows on the walls. She waited near the door, heart pounding when she heard the familiar sound of keys jingling. The front door opened and Nathan stepped inside, carrying his suitcase. He looked tired, worn from travel, but when he saw her, his eyes softened. He smiled faintly, and she felt the tension in her chest ease slightly. "Hey," he said, setting his bag down. "How was your day?" Ava swallowed, fighting the urge to retreat into silence to avoid the hard conversation she knew she needed. We need to talk," she said gently. She saw his expression change: curiosity, concern, a hint of apprehension. They moved to the living room, sitting across from each other on the couch. Ava watched him carefully, noting the small lines around his eyes, the way his hands rested loosely on his knees. He looked at her with patience, waiting. She took a deep breath. "I've felt distant from you," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I don't know when it started exactly, but I feel like we stopped really talking, like we stopped being us." Nathan nodded slowly. "I've felt that too," he admitted. His voice was quiet, but there was honesty in it. "I thought maybe you were fine, or that I was imagining it, but I felt it too. I didn't know how to fix it." Her throat tightened. "It's not just the distance. It's the silence. We live together, but we're separate. And it's been so long since I felt connected to you, like you really saw me." He reached out tentatively, taking her hand in his. The simple touch brought warmth, reassurance, and a reminder of why she loved him. "I didn't realize," he said softly. "I thought I was doing my part, working, providing. But I see now that I wasn't there for you emotionally. I wasn't present." Ava's eyes filled with tears, and she didn't try to stop them. I needed to be heard, Nathan. I needed to feel like we were together, not just coexisting." Squeezed her hand gently. "I want that too. I don't want us to just exist. I want to feel close to you again." For the first time in months, they spoke without barriers, without fear of judgment. They shared feelings that had been suppressed, confessions of loneliness, regrets for the times they had turned inward instead of toward each other. They admitted mistakes, misunderstandings, the small hurts that had built up quietly over the years. But they also spoke of hope, of love that had not disappeared but had simply been neglected. Hours passed as they talked, sometimes in silence, sometimes in bursts of words. The room was filled with soft lamplight and the gentle rhythm of shared breaths. Each confession and each reassurance acted like bricks, slowly rebuilding a foundation that had weakened over time. They laughed sometimes, remembering small, joyful moments they had shared, moments that had been forgotten amidst the routine and stress of life. At one point, Ava realized how easy it was to look at him and remember why she had fallen in love. Nathan's expression, his voice, the warmth in his eyes, it reminded her of better days. Of laughter, of late-night talks, of being truly seen. And she realized how close she had come the night before to seeking that kind of attention elsewhere. She had felt drawn to Ethan's calm understanding. But what she truly needed was to reconnect with her husband, to rebuild the love that had always been there, waiting to be nurtured. Nathan leaned back, exhaling deeply. "I think we've been avoiding each other for too long," he said. "I don't want to do that anymore. I want us to be honest, to really be present for each other." Ava nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I want that too," she said. "I don't want to lose us to silence." They sat in quiet for a while, holding hands, letting the moments sink in. The distance of the past weeks, the emotional gap didn't disappear instantly. But it felt smaller, manageable, bridgeable. There was relief, but also a sense of responsibility. They knew this was just the beginning, the first honest conversation in a long time. It wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start, and it was enough. Later, as they prepared for bed, Ava felt a quiet strength inside her. She knew the night with Ethan had been a mirror, showing her what she had been missing. But it had also been a warning, a reminder that connection outside marriage could tempt her if she ignored what was missing at home. She didn't feel guilt anymore. She felt clarity. She had recognized her needs, faced them, and chosen to return to the person who could truly meet them, Nathan. Nathan wrapped his arms around her that night. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel safe, understood, and loved. They didn't speak much as they drifted toward sleep, but the silence this time was comforting, not heavy. It was the kind of silence that comes after healing conversations, after understanding has been restored, after a connection has been remembered. Ava realized that love wasn't just about passion or excitement. It was about attention, honesty, and presence. It was about choosing to face the gaps and fill them together, instead of letting them grow into walls. She understood that storms both outside and inside were inevitable, but they could be survived with patience, courage, and care. And in the morning, when the sun rose again, the house felt different. Not because it had changed physically, but because Ava and Nathan had begun to rebuild the bond that had been quietly fraying. The emotional storm had passed, leaving clarity, warmth, and hope. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time in months, Ava felt confident that their love was strong enough to weather the distance, the silence, and any storm that came their way.